Timothy Allen, and let's talk about 12-step programs today. Anyone who's been involved with addiction treatment will find out that almost everyone is referring people to 12-step programs. Why is it that this is commonly referred to, and why is it it's so universal, and how does it work, and does it work? That's a really good question. The first and foremost reason why people use 12-step programs is they are cheap and effective. People who enroll in a 12-step program, on average, have about a 30% chance of success at being sober at 5 years. It's pretty darn good, especially for something which approaches free in terms of cost. It also doesn't have particular side effects, doesn't interact with other medications. So, the first question is, how does it work? Why does it work? Why would we use it? And those sorts of things. Well, obviously the reason why we do use it is because it is effective for 30% of people. The question about how it works has to do with looking at who it works for. There's been a lot of studies that have been done on 12-step programs. And one of the things that we find is that there's only one group of people who go to a 12-step program who find long-term success. And that's people who have, quote, a spiritual experience or spiritual awakening, end quote. And so basically, these programs work for people who develop a relationship with God. Those people who really get God have a tendency to do well in the programs, and those who don't. It's quite interesting that in studies that have looked at how 12-step programs work, we found that it doesn't matter if you went there on your own or if you were dragged there by your spouse, sent there by court order. The success rates are the same. It doesn't matter if you use more drugs and alcohol or less. It doesn't matter if you've been using longer or you've been using less. It doesn't matter how many meetings you go to. It doesn't matter if you have a sponsor. It doesn't matter if you work the steps. None of these things make a difference. It doesn't matter if you have more psychiatric disease or less psychiatric disease, interestingly enough. It is people who have a spiritual transformation who improve. Well, why is that? Well, it makes a lot of sense. One of the things that I'm very aware of in addiction treatment is that I need to help people to have a better life. People to do better if they want to get off drugs. People use drugs for a reason. And interestingly, drugs and religion take very similar places in our lives. When we look at people who use drugs, if they're stressed or overwhelmed, if they're anxious, if they're having a hard time, they go to drugs. People who have a spiritual life, if they are stressed, overwhelmed, anxious, they go to God. People who use drugs, their social life tends to revolve around drugs and those sorts of things. People who are religious, their social life is often revolving around their church, their synagogue, their mosque, their other religious practice, and their friends are also part of that. People who use drugs often self-identify based on their drug use. People who are religious, their self-identity is tied up in that. And so what we're doing is we're taking a maladaptive pattern and replacing it with an adaptive plan. One of the things that I tell people is that there are good studies that show that people who attend church regularly, people who have a strong religious faith, on average live 10 years longer than people who don't have a strong religious faith. People whose God is heroin or alcohol or other drugs certainly don't live longer. And so anytime that you have a chance to trade from below average to above average, that's a good trade. So when I talk to people about 12-step programs, what I do is I tell them why it works, okay? It's really about developing a relationship with God. It's really about developing this understanding of who you are in the light of who God is. If you're the sort of person who tells me, I'm not doing that, I don't believe in God, I don't want anything to do with that, well, I don't think this is going to be a very effective treatment for you. If you're willing to consider it, even if you haven't looked at it before, it may very well be worth it for you. Will it work for everyone? No. But it does work for 30% of people. That is a significant chunk. And if I can make 30% of people better at almost no cost with basically no side effects, hey, that's a really good idea. If you have any questions about these or other issues in addiction, be happy to see you in the clinic. Please feel free to call the office. I hope that you have a good day. Thank you and goodbye.